This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast, and this week's pick is their line of historic competition Shelby Cobras in 1/43rd scale by TSM. Use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout and get 10% off your order. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's ModelCitizenDiecast.com, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Greetings to all of you listening far and wide. Great to have you here. And before we get started, I want to share that recently Horsepower Heritage was listed as one of the best automotive podcasts over at feedspot.com, which is billed as the internet's largest human-curated database of bloggers and podcasts. So that was kind of cool to see. And, I work pretty hard to bring you guys great stories and guests with every episode, so it's always nice to get recognized. And by the way, if there's a topic or a guest you'd like to see on the show, go to horsepowerheritage.com, drop me a line, just click on the contact button over there and fire away, and I'll do my best to fulfill your wishes. All right, my guest today is Ed Justice Jr. Now, Ed is a lifelong motorsport photographer. He started when he was just a teenager, and his family's history with hot rods and auto racing goes back to the 1930s. Now, after World War II, his father and his two uncles went into business with their own line of oil additives, lubricants, and other products, and the Justice Brothers Company has been sponsoring race cars ever since, from stock cars to Daytona to Le Mans. Ed's also an award-winning broadcaster who hosted the Road and Track radio show, which was syndicated on over 60 terrestrial and satellite stations every week, and he's emceed countless concours events over the years, all over the country. And he's a motorsport historian who's known just about everyone in American racing in the last 50 years. He's also the co-author of a fantastic book called Legacy of Justice, which is just one subject we'll talk about today. So I sat down with Ed not long ago, surrounded by his amazing car collection, and we covered a lot of ground. And in addition to this audio version, you can see the full video version of this interview on my YouTube channel. There's also a bonus video where Ed talks about some favorite photos over his 50-year career, and that is not to be missed. Great photography. So check those out. And if you enjoy Horsepower Heritage, you can support the show by following it on your favorite podcast app. Just click that plus button you see on your screen. And also leave me 5 stars and a quick review. That's really important because it helps new listeners discover the show. I don't make up the rules, I'm just telling you how it works. Also really important, I depend on you guys to keep spreading the word, and that's another way the show grows. So please be part of that effort. You guys are such a great audience, and I can't do this without you. And now, without further ado, here's my interview with Ed Justice Jr., right here on Horsepower Heritage. Well, Ed, thanks for doing this today. It's really a pleasure to be here at your collection, and so impressive. I mean,
yeah, well, it's it represents our family and American racing, and it's eclectic. There isn't any one particular thing. We're all over the board. I mean, you've got drag racing, you've got dirt oval racing, the Spaceballs, Mercedes. I mean, dry lakes. When my dad and I started this, we see things that we liked and just say, hey, that would be sort of fun. And like midget auto racing, we have clearly the largest collection of midget auto race cars in existence, for whatever that means. And that's a big part of our past. I mean, my dad and uncle, there's an image on the wall behind me that they built their first race car, which was a midget auto race car, preteen. And then my uncle went to work for Frank Kurtis as his first employee. And of course, my dad worked there too. And Kurtis was most well known for his midget auto race cars and Indy cars. And he built some other ones, sport cars. But the most that he built, the largest quantity, were the midget auto race cars. And it was a great, it was the number one form of racing after World War II. So
Sure, that was how you got into racing.
Right, and how you made it to Indianapolis, and I mean, it's a great form of racing for a lot of reasons, and it still goes on today.
Now, the Justice Brothers story really kind of starts around 1936, right? When your dad came out to California?
Yeah, well, yeah, it actually, it's a good question that's not exactly easy to answer. I mean, it really starts in Kansas, south of Kansas City, when they started building that first race car, et cetera. But my dad came out to California, in the late 30s, pre-World War II. He had gone to aircraft mechanic school, Fry Aircraft School in Kansas City. Fry Aircraft School was created by Donald Fry, who was the brother of Jack Fry. Jack Fry was one of the founders of TWA, and they were icons in early aviation. I mean, this is in the early days of aviation. If you remember, in World War II, we didn't even have the Air Force. My dad was in what they called the Army Air Corps. It was part of the Army at that point. So when he came out to California after having graduated as an aircraft mechanic, A&E, airframe and engines, he went to work for Douglas Aircraft in the flight test department, exactly what it sounds like, flight test, working under Donald Douglas Jr., the son of the founder of Douglas Aircraft. And of course, Douglas, Lockheed, Boeing, those are McDonnell, later, merged into McDonnell Douglas. Those are icons of aviation world.
So your dad found himself really on the ground floor in the epicenter of what would become one of the most important manufacturing areas for aircraft in the United States and motorsport.
Yeah, my dad, he was Midwesterner through and through, my family. My mom was from outside of Omaha, Nebraska. So my parents' roots were all in the Midwest, like Walt Disney, like Johnny Carson, like a lot of icons that a lot of people, in America know. I mean, the Midwestern whole feeling, very much pro-America, very much salt of the earth people. And but my dad wanted to go to California really bad. He just so saw that what you alluded to, that things were happening in California. And this is the place you needed to be if you wanted to be involved in the action. You needed to be there for the aviation. He loved palm trees. He loved the year-round weather. I mean, I've got pictures of their little race car in Kansas sitting out by the curve covered with snow. Man, he was just really over that. He wanted to go where you could, drive your car, a nice car, and he very much was into the custom car world, and had a 36 Ford sedan convertible that he had customized. And when he came to California, he continued to customize that. And so, it was where my dad really wanted to be, needed to be. He was the youngest of 6 kids. There were 3 girls and 3 boys in their family. And he found a home when he came to California. He just loved it. He ended up moving the rest of the family out here.
Your dad spoke to his brother Zeke, right, first, and said, hey, you ought to come out.
Yeah, well, my dad was the youngest of the 6 kids. And it was exactly 3 girls and 3 boys, not 2 girls, a boy, the other girl and whatever. And so my dad was in Santa Monica. My dad was a great roller skater. He was a great ice skater. And I mean, I'm talking top level, okay? I never reached that quality. And so he was at the roller rink in Santa Monica, and he met a guy who was a male secretary to a guy by the name of Joel Thorne. Joel Thorne was an East Coast kid that had inherited a huge amount of money. $500 million, $1 billion. I forget the conversion in today's dollars. It was huge. His dad owned the Chase Bank. His dad was Pullman rail cars, old East Coast money. His father had gotten killed by the side of the road changing a tire, as the story goes.
Of all things.
Yeah, and so Joel inherited this money in a trust. His father had also just finalized a divorce, not from Joel's mom, as I remember, from his second or third marriage or whatever it was. And so when Joel became of age, he came to California and created a race shop. He had the money, had no adult supervision, and he would get these checks. You know, it was doled out. I mean, he didn't just, boom, get it. He got so much a week. So my dad met this fellow who was Joel Thorne's male secretary. And he just got to talking, you know, and making friends and all that. And he said that they were looking to hire people. Well, my dad was very happy working at Douglas Aircraft, had a great job there. But he told the guy, my brother, Zeke, whose real name was Lawrence Milton, but he had got a nickname Zeke as a young kid, has the talents I think you're looking for. And the guy said, well, send them on out, have them come on out, we'll put them to work. So my dad got in touch with my Uncle Zeke. My Uncle Zeke was working at Western Auto at that time, which is a company that was founded by a gentleman by the name of George Pepperdine, who founded a famous college here in Southern California also.
Sure.
And my Uncle Zeke wasn't at first really game for coming out, but my dad says, no, you need to come out here. Got him out here. He went to work for Thorne, and that was really one of the real first seeds that then would later just put them in the middle of everything. I mean, when it came, Frank Kurtis worked at Thorne's. He rented a space upstairs in the building. There's some what would become legends worked at Thorne's, and so yeah, it was an amazing move, and really affected him.
Now, your dad served in the Army Air Forces in World War II, and then came home and went right back into fabrication work?
Yeah, so my dad was the only one of the three brothers that was able to serve in World War II. When it looked like he was going to get drafted, he enlisted, like a lot of people did, and because he wanted to be a pilot, but he couldn't pass the color test.
Sure.
And so because of his experience, they did take him into the Army Air Corps, and he served in that way. He ended up becoming a flight engineer, and he did fly the right seat, co-pilot seat, quite a bit once he got over in the theater. Never bombing missions. He was part of what they call the ferry squadron. In the ferry squadron, my dad would always say we were the janitors of the Air Force. They would ferry planes to bases for the bomber crews to take, and then they would also ferry damaged planes back to repair depots. And so they were logistics in today's world. So he got to fly a lot. My Uncle Zeke couldn't serve because he had polio. So he had one leg that was shorter than the other due to the disease. As much as they needed bodies for the war, they weren't taking people like that. And my other uncle, Gus, had been paralyzed in an auto wreck at 21 years of age. And so my dad was the lone brother that served in World War II.
And then he gets home, and where do we pick up the story there?
Well, so yeah, my dad, during the war, my Uncle Zeke, at one point in time, Joel Thorne shut the shop down because you couldn't get any raw materials, right. Okay? But so all that was going on. So my Uncle Zeke got a job working on the Big Inch, which was a pipeline that came out of the Midwest, Oklahoma, whatever, went up to the eastern seaboard to take fuel for the war effort. And he was a oiler. because you'd have these pumping stations that were every so often, and he would go check the pumping station, oil them, and all that. So he worked. When the war ended, Frank Kurtis offered my Uncle Zeke a job to go to work at what he was going to start called Kurtis-Kraft. Frank built cars prior to Kurtis-Kraft, and those were just Frank Kurtis built cars. I owned the first midget that Frank Kurtis designed and built. It's not a Kurtis-Kraft midget at that point. And so my Uncle Zeke said, yeah, great, that'd be great. And he became the first employee at Kurtis-Kraft. Another gentleman by the name of Emil Diet became the second employee, and then it went from there. When my dad got discharged out of the war and he came back on the Queen Mary across the ocean, ended up, they took him to Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. I think that's where Tinker was.
Yep.
And then they discharged him there. And Zeke said, hey, Ed, come on out to the West Coast and want him back out there. At first, my dad did not go to work for Kurtis. And then Frank said, hey, Ed, you know, you were fabricating aluminum, because that's what caused the boom and the increase in technology in auto racing, were a lot of these guys like my dad that had been trained by the U.S. military. My dad wasn't, but there were a lot that were. And they ended up going into the auto racing field, and they had all these fabrication skills. I mean, look at a lot of helicopter pilots to this day come out of the military.
Sure.
It's a cheaper way to learn how to fly a helicopter, until the little Robinson came along, which is a great way to learn how to fly a helicopter today. So my dad went to work at Kurtis-Kraft, and they helped build Indy cars, midgets, in Glendale, California.
Now, what's the genesis of the Justice Brothers brand? Because they got into lubricants and other petroleum products pretty early. Was that an outgrowth of Zeke working on the Big Inch, and he kind of saw how the petroleum business worked?
No, Zeke is involved, but not in that way. Zeke ran into a product in Glendale, and the product had just been, quote, developed by this gentleman who was a retired attorney, and he was in his 70s, mid-70s, and it was unknown. I mean, if the product was made here, literally 5 feet away, nobody basically knew about the product. And so this older gentleman was out trying to find people to buy this product. Zeke saw it. He was impressed by what he saw. And my dad and Zeke, that's the one question that, and I asked him a ton of questions, and we did a lot of interviews over the years. They never really could quite give me a definitive answer why they saw the need to leave building race cars and get into the oil additive business. Other than the best they could come up with was, we were building so many of these race cars that we thought we're going to fill the pipeline, and then what are we going to do? And on top of that, they felt that their ability to earn a living was restricted by, they were just basically hired labor. And that, good or bad, they got paid X an hour. And my dad and Zeke were looking for opportunities where they could have a greater control over their earning ability. And selling was that opportunity. And so this product just happened to work into that whole picture that they had in their mind of trying to better themselves. And because they came from really no money. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Their dad was an auctioneer. He did all right, but their dad died young from cancer in his early 40s. And 6 kids, they never really lived in a really nice home. Their early home was very small. I mean, it looked like something you'd find down in the bayou.
Typical Depression era kids.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, they came from nothing. Yeah. And they're very not uncommon American success story. My dad, told me when I was growing up, Ed, from the neck down, you're worth so much an hour. From the neck up, you can determine what you're worth. But there's risk involved in that. There's no guarantees in life. And so they saw this product and they took all the money they had and invested it into 90 cases of this product. And they had to move to Florida because the way the opportunity presented itself, even though they were the first distributors for this product. And they had no place to live down there, had never been to Florida in their life, and were driving across country on Highway 10 today that goes right into Jacksonville, Florida, where we settled. And so like my dad said, nothing happens until somebody sells something. And he said, I had a wife who was 6 months pregnant. We had a child on the way, and we needed a place to live, and we needed to eat. And so I had to go out and sell the product. So if that doesn't make you enthusiastic and have the motivation to do something, and there were times in their life when I asked them, did you ever consider going on unemployment? And my dad and all my uncles said no. It was never, ever, ever something that we considered, because back in that era, it was considered what they call going on the dole. And they were able-bodied. And case in point, my uncle Gus, who was paralyzed, he handled the stuff in the office. And my dad and uncles were very tight. They were brothers from the old school. I mean, they would have disagreements and get into disagreements that people thought they were going to come to blows. And I always warned people, do not try to break them up, because if you do, they will become united and you are now the new target. And they will deflect all that, what they were just deflecting on each other, now to you. So I said, just let them work it out. They'll work it out. And, they had disagreements just like everybody does.
They were brothers. That's how brothers are.
That's it. I mean, look at, they beat on each other when they were growing up. And that's what they call socialization skills, Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, people that train dogs will tell you the same thing. I mean, you take a dog away from the litter early and they tend to be scared and they can be more of a biter, et cetera. It's good for the dogs to stay together in the litter and chew on each other and just sort of learn how to get along rather than alienating them and becoming a, quote, loner.
Right.
So
now, you were born into a family that was around race cars, knew everyone in the business. What is your first memory of being at a track or being around race cars?
I've got a number. I mean, when I was growing up, we'd do these family Sunday drives, which a lot of people did. And we were out by the Pomona Fairgrounds, and they were running drag races on that patch of asphalt that they still do today for the Winter Nationals and the World Finals. And my dad, we pulled up, and they didn't have any protective screening on the chain link fence. You could look in and see it. You could actually stand outside, not buy a ticket, and it was different. A lot of things were different back then. And so my dad says, Ed, look, watch, there's the car at the starting line. So I look, and I'm hanging out the window of the back of my parents' car, and hell yeah. And I go, what are they going to do? And he goes, they're going to go down the track, and all. So I look down for whatever reason. And when I look back up, I go, where'd the cars go? And boom, they were down the track, gone. And for my impression as a young kid at that time, it was as if somebody waved a magic wand and the cars were gone. And they were not going fast at that point. I mean, this is 100 and some miles an hour probably. I mean,
how old do you think you were at that point?
Oh, I was under 10. I was under 10. But, as I was meeting people, and, I had a quarter midget when I was 5, and I drove that for a little while, 5, 6, and then my mom was the most instrumental in sort of putting the lid on that deal. And my dad was very much in favor of me not becoming a race car driver.
It was dangerous business.
Well, yeah, I get asked that question, probably more common than any other question, is how come you never became a race car driver? Well, it wasn't because I necessarily didn't want to when I was a kid, but my dad, in that era, you know, there were 10 drivers a year getting killed. I mean, the greatest names, okay? It was sheer bad luck, okay? Not for lack of skill a lot of times. And, I mean, to this day.
And there were no safety measures per se.
No flame retardant. Helmets were leather helmets. They wore a lap belt, no shoulder harnesses. You know, the idea for race cars at that era was to get thrown from the car.
Right.
The cars were built incredibly strong, which would make you think that it would protect the driver, but that actually helped contribute to driver death. Today, the cars are built to fly apart, and so that disperses the energy, and drivers have a greater tendency to survive. So, but my dad said, look, Ed, you know, if you, in effect, sort of want to have a short life, you know, you become a race car driver. And he didn't mean it in a derogatory way. It was just realistic. So he helped to divert me into the photography world, and which I was fascinated by. And I've always been fascinated and had a strong interest in the arts, graphic design, illustration. There was a point in time I really thought I might want to become a cartoonist.
When was the first time you picked up a camera?
Well, I got my first film camera when I was 12, and it was a reflex rangefinder camera, fixed lens, you know, and you bring the images together and all that. And so I started shooting with that. And I've actually had the pictures that I shot with that camera have been in publications. And, you know, I've sold them years later. And then from there, I got my first SLR, a single lens reflex camera, which was a Nikon F, which was a, you know, historic SLR. That's interchangeable lens. And so the interchangeable lens part for auto racing, because that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to shoot pictures of the race cars. Here I was going to all these events with my dad and my family, and I wanted to be able to shoot pictures at them.
Now, your dad being who he was, I'm guessing that allowed you some access at the track that most people wouldn't get.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes. So I would be around people and just capturing just things happening. And part of photography is access, okay? I mean, but you can make access. I mean, I show young people all the time how to, I mean, I've gone to lots of events where I haven't had, quote, the pass, and still can come home with great images. And because you have to train yourself, you have to train your eye, you have to be, you know, a guerrilla photographer. And so you can do that without credentials. But really, one of the seminal events was my dad had hired a photographer to shoot pictures of one of our race cars, the backup pickup, the backwards wheel stander.
And by the way, Justice Brothers had been sponsoring race cars since, what, 1950, the first Indy car?
Yeah, oh, no.
Before that?
Prior to that, yeah, okay. Right after the war. And we won Indy in 50.
Gotcha.
So anyway, he hired this photographer. The guy went out. He was a newspaper photographer. Newspaper photographers are general good all-round photographers. I mean, that's how they win the Pulitzer Prize, etc. But shooting motorsports is a different thing, particularly for the type of picture that my dad, they wanted. And the guy was really not a sports photographer. And the picture was really not good, in my opinion, okay? And I told my dad that. And here's this young kid saying, Dad, that picture's junk. I said, it's terrible. You can't see the logo, it's blurred, the guy used the wrong shutter speed, et cetera, it didn't pan. And anyway, and my dad said, well, you think you can do better? And I said, yeah, I know I can do better, not lacking for self-confidence. And he said, okay, well then, if you can do better, you go ahead and shoot one and show me. Well, I did. I shot a better picture, and that was one of the first published photos of mine.
And you were, about 15 at this point?
Yeah, 14. 14. Because at 14, I was selling pictures to the magazines. And I'd have to be driven to the racetrack by my dad or one of my uncles. And they'd drop me off many times, never stay there. I'd go off into the track, do my thing. Again, it was a different time, okay? It was a lot safer. It was a lot of things. And so I would do that. And so anyway, yeah, actually, I may have been even younger than 14, to tell you the truth. So anyway, somewhere around there. It was very early on. And so I wanted to get the job of being the track photographer at Irwindale Raceway, which was a local drag strip not far from where we are right now. And but my mentor, good friend, had the job of track photographer. But an opportunity came up that the fellow who wrote the weekly column for Drag News and National Dragster, the two big newspapers that covered drag racing in that era, was leaving the strip. And I could get that position if I wanted it. Now, I was in high school at this point, but it was a job at the drag strip, and I was going to get paid $35 a week, and I got a free hamburger. Okay, and so I took it. And so I wrote the weekly column for Drag News, National Dragster, every week for Irwindale, and that included the big events with funny cars, Top Fuel, and fuel altereds, and drag bikes, and all that other stuff. And it also included the weekends when it was John Doe driving his
Run What You
Plymouth,
Love.
Whatever, yeah, or Chevy Nova, or whatever, which is exciting for those who are driving those cars, but it wasn't, it's not like watching a funny car, okay? And so it can be pretty plain vanilla. Bruce Barrett beat John Doe off the line, John Doe red lighted. So you start having to develop your writing style and learn how to write. And so I did what a lot of people do. I read what other people wrote, and I then made that my own, but looking at the adjectives, the verbs, sprinted off the line, all this type of stuff.
Color it up a little.
Yeah, exactly. And it had to be a certain length, but it couldn't be over a certain length. So you learn all these things. It was tough for a guy that age, for me, but it was great. And, I write a lot today, and people go, wow, you really enjoy your writing and all that. And I guess my message to people is, okay, yeah, if I can do it, you can do it, okay? You just got to keep doing it. You just got to keep doing it. I mean, that's how you hone any skill.
Ed, the history of Indianapolis Motor Speedway is so incredible, over 100 years now, and you were there for a lot of it.
Yeah. I've been blessed to be involved. The Indy 500, I agree with A.J. Foyt and many others. It's the greatest spectacle in racing. It is the greatest race in the world. Now, a very, very close second, and I know that some of my friends feel differently, is the 24-hour Le Mans. And really, you know what? They're apples and oranges, okay? But I will tell you the difference between the two. Indy has the largest single-day sporting attendance of any event in the world, paid paid. Le Mans is not all paid. World Cup is multiple days, okay? Le Mans is 2 days. Indy is 1 day. Indy, they've actually run 105 races. It was interrupted by 2 world wars, and so there was a period of time, starting at 1911 was the first 500-mile race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 1909 was the first race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but starting in 1911 to last year, with the interruption of the 2 world wars, there's been 105 races. My family has been involved in 75 of those 105 races. Me, I think it's like 45 for me. My first was in 1977. And you count that. Unlike birthdays where you subtract and you don't count your birth year because it didn't go a year. When you're involved in something, you count the first year because that counts. And so I was brought into the Indianapolis Old Timers Club at the same time my dad and Uncle Zeke were, which was quite an honor. I was in my 40s. I was the youngest member at that time. And there's just nothing like Indianapolis. I mean, look at Romain Grosjean, okay, gave his feeling on IndyCar racing. IndyCar racing really at this point in time is more competitive than F1. And that's not an anti-F1 sentiment. I love F1, and I think this last year has been phenomenal in F1. And I love all forms of racing, by the way. I mean, equally, okay? But you have a greater chance for some unknown person to win an IndyCar than you do in F1. I mean, look there's Mercedes, Red Bull, and then there's everybody else, okay? I mean, the lack of parity in F1, and by no means do I think they should regulate to create parity. I don't like that. I don't like that when the sanctioning body gets involved. But there are so many top-level teams in IndyCar that it's really, really tough. And this next year is going to be just equally as good. Jackie Stewart, I was next to Jackie one time, and I've seen him multiple times, been with him multiple times at Indianapolis over the years. And he was announcing for ABC, but this was prior to going on the air, and he had a group there. And we're down on the grid. The cars are on the track right prior to Gentlemen Start Your Engines. The crews are still around. I'm standing there. Jackie's got a group with him. And he's explaining how nothing in his life has ever equaled what we're experiencing right now. The excitement, this crowd, the energy, the whole just
spectacle.
The greatest spectacle in racing. Yeah, the spectacle. The only thing he said that beats this is when he was in Vatican Square and the Pope came out. Now that sort of puts it into perspective. And it is unlike anything. Seriously, I mean, it is unlike anything. There's another thing in a completely different way that people, until they experience it, they have no idea. And that is taking somebody to their first Top Fuel or Funny Car drag race and having them stand by the starting line where the spectators can stand and them looking at you like, oh my gosh, my heart was rattling in my body. I mean, the earth was moving, it was shaking. I mean, there's no way to explain that unless you experience it. And the same thing for Indianapolis. There's just no way. The Gentlemen Start Your Engines, the back home in Indiana. Of course, Jim Neighbors, God bless him, who was a great friend. He was a great tradition for so many years, and now the new fellow, who's a great guy. Man, what a voice that guy has. I had breakfast with him prior to the race this year, just by happenstance, with he and a friend of his.
The hair on the back of your neck stands up, right?
It does. And then the cannons go off when the cars are starting and the balloons are going. And It's unbelievable. I mean, it is really amazing. Indianapolis is one of a kind. And A.J. Foyt's right. Indy made A.J. Foyt. A.J. Foyt didn't make Indianapolis.
Let's talk about sponsorship at Indianapolis, being involved with that. And I'm sure you've got a lot of memories there too.
Yeah, okay, so I'll use 1950 because that one's interesting, because we won. That year in our book, Legacy of Justice, there's a copy of a letter. I have the original letter that was sent to my Uncle Zeke from Frank Kurtis offering the sponsorship deal for $5,000 for the year. At that time, in 1950, Indianapolis was the first race of the year. Surprisingly enough, the biggest event of the Indy car season, or the Champ car season as it was known then, was the first race of the year. That is why, in my opinion, why the Daytona 500 is at the beginning of the year, at Daytona. They could have put it any time of the year, but surprisingly enough, stock car racing's biggest event of the year is at the beginning of the year. Okay, so whatever. That's my take. But Frank offered it for $5,000. He had run the car in '49. Johnny Parsons was the driver for Frank in '49. The car was red, and they won the national championship. It was number 12 in 1949, as I remember. They won the national championship. So going into 1950, the year that he offered my family the sponsorship, the car was going to be carrying the number 1. It was the national champion. It was the Max Verstappen for next year, because he just announced he's going to carry the number 1. And so that was part of it. So they went to the company they were with. The company was not interested, had a very low opinion of racers at that time. You know, motorcycle riders back in the day were, you know, not somebody you'd let your daughter date, okay? Back then, you know, they ne'er-do-well sort of reputation. So anyway, they cobbled together the money, and a lot of money back then, and put together the deal. Well, when they got to Indianapolis, Frank said, well, I'm going to have a team car to Johnny that's going to be driven by Freddie Agabashian, and that will be one of my newer cars. And you know what? We'll paint it up just like that other car, and it's a freebie. So they had 2 cars in the field for $5,000.
Both yellow.
Yeah, both yellow, which was my dad's choice. The company did not like the fact that he painted them yellow cars, but my dad wanted the cars to stand out, and these were way before the, quote, yellow submarine Pennzoil cars. Lo and behold, Johnny wins the race, and it changed my dad and their lives. So yeah, we've sponsored cars at Indy every year over the years. A.J. Foyt 1 year, Johnny Rutherford, Cotton Farmer, Chuck Holz. I can't even remember all of them.
Well, it's a long time.
Yeah, a long time. I mean,
and Ed, how about this year?
Well, this year, yeah. Gosh, you know what?
I mean,
yeah.
How can we not talk about that?
Yeah, well, you know what? 71 years after we went to Victory Lane in 2021, we found Victory Lane again on the side of a car as a sponsor with them using our products, et cetera, with Elio Castroneves, and that was pretty special. We were involved with 2 teams this year, the Meyer Shank Racing Team and the Dreyer Reinbold Racing Team. Both excellent teams, both mean a lot to me in different ways. The Dreyer Reinbold team is a very traditional, old school, the way Indy used to be. They typically only run Indianapolis, which is very unusual in today's world. They might run another race or 2. But Elio, I felt from the beginning, provided the team was able to put together the good pit stops, et cetera, that Elio knew how to find Victory Lane. I mean, he's been there 3 times before. Elio is a very smart driver. He reminds me a little bit of Al Unser. senior, as most people say, even though he is not technically senior. Al Unser, who just recently passed away, who was a very good friend, was a very patient driver. He would let the race come to him. And people don't understand how hard that is for a driver to do that. When you're on the track and you're seeing people running ahead from you and you're very myopic in your viewpoint and you see cars pull away from you and they say, yeah, you're good, you're running 7th, you're running 6th, you're what? Man, I mean, most competitors are alpha dogs, and Parnelli Jones would be the first to tell you he was an alpha dog. He told me a number of times if he had been able to be more like Al Sr., Jimmy Johnson, very patient driver like Al Sr., he said, I would have won more races. But he said, I always had to be the leader of the pack. I had to be that alpha dog out there in front, and you pay the price for that in many times. So I knew Elio was running in the top 10, and I knew, it's that last 20 laps, you want to be here. Last 15 laps, you want to be here. Last 10 laps, okay, now you want to be here within striking distance. And I knew that if Elio, the way it was going, that he stayed on the same lap, he was in that front pack, that he had a really good chance of winning. Now, the last turn can determine the race. And, I interviewed Chip Ganassi at an event up in Napa recently, and of course his car finished second, Alex Palou. Tough competition in that race. Alex Palou was very, very tough competition. He was a rookie too. This young kid is a great driver. He's going to be great. Won the national championship, of course, with IndyCar this year. So, I mean, I'm not stating anything that hasn't been shown. But that young guy is really, really good. And Chip told me, he said, I knew when he pulled up behind Ryan Hunter-Reay in turn 3 and got that tow, Chip said, I knew it was over. Now, Chip's a former driver, okay? He knows what it feels like in the seat. So he's been there, done that. As I said to Chip jokingly, this is the difference between experience and a new young kid. Alex, maybe from what he learned, he won't let that happen to him again. Next time it would be different. But that's next time. This was this time. And this time, Elio had the experience, and he had a car and a team under him that was delivering what needed to happen that day. And so it's not over till it's over, as they say. And I don't want to say, I knew he was going to win, because nobody can say that. But I knew that he had a good chance. But I've also known that we've been on other cars that have had a good chance and they haven't finished, or they've finished second. Jeff Ward, a few years back, we finished second with Jeff Ward. Greg Ray, we sat on the front row of the field and led laps that year. Everything's just got to line up. That's why when we won, it was as big a shock to me as it was to anybody. And it was unbelievable after 71 years, to finally get into victory lane again.
Did it pop into your head that you wish your dad could have been there to see it again?
Oh yeah, obviously, sure. I wish my dad and my uncles, all three of them, could be around to see a lot of things. They never got to see the book that came out. And I think they would just be blown away at how Tom Madigan and me, I'm a co-author, were able to tell the story, communicate what they went through, bring it on up into modern day and all the years of my involvement into the company, now into a third generation with my daughters. And I think they would just be blown away with what I was able to mine. I mean, I found a picture of the first racetrack they ever went to a race at. I mean, the amount of time and research that when they won, my dad really never told me the story about our sponsorship to the degree that I found of motorcycles on Daytona Beach. Because, there's a whole time that they were running stock cars, they were running motorcycles too. And the motorcycles have sort of gotten a short stick on the history on that. And trust me, I'm speaking from experience because I did every bit of research you can on motorcycles on Daytona Beach, and it's really not been covered the way it should have been, or near to what stock cars have. So I had all these pictures from, I think it was 1949, when Floyd MD won on an Indian motorcycle. It was the last major race won by an Indian motorcycle, 1949. And Floyd MD, of course, famous guy. His son later, Don MD, would come back and win the race. Only father-son team to do that when they moved it to Daytona International Speedway. So when I did the research and I found out that Life magazine had covered that race in an issue of Life, and that the quote that I found in the Life magazine, which is in the book, something to the effect of, the city of Daytona Beach couldn't have been under more peril or danger during this race of the motorcycles, et cetera, if it had been under direct bombardment. I mean, now that is a quote for the eternity. I mean, this, and you know, I forget how many riders died that year. There was like 150 starters. Think about that, 150 motorcycles starting on the beach at Daytona.
And Daytona's wide, but that's a lot of bikes for even Daytona.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, it is. And so, you know, the fact that I was able to find these things and connect the dots and honestly find the story about my uncle driving a two-man Indy car on the street after it had retired after about like 5 or 6 Indy 500s, and he drove it on the street as a street car. Drove it from California to Kansas. I mean, it's just, I had a lot of help from above, trust me, when it came to piecing this together. And not just to the best of our ability. I'm telling you, I was able to nail down the facts based on documents I was able to find that are documents. It's not somebody's opinion that, well, I think this car did this or that. I mean, if we couldn't prove it, we didn't put it in the book.
Well, and of course, original source material is the best you can get. It's the gold standard.
Best, and it has been made a lot easier by the internet. But anybody that's been involved in writing a book knows to do it right, it's a multi-year project. You slap out a book in a year or so. I mean, that's what they do for the quick deals, you know, when somebody dies and they slap it out and they sell 1 million copies. But it takes a lot of time to really do the history right.
Well, no, this is an heirloom book, and we're talking nearly 500 pages.
Right.
I love the title, Legacy of Justice.
Yeah, that was Tom Madigan's. Tom, to be quite honest, had complete editorial oversight. He wanted to do the book years ago, and I said no, because I didn't feel it was the right time. There is a time to write a history, and the best time is as deep into the history as you can while people are still around, okay? And we were really blessed in that way, because a lot of people from when we interviewed them, when Tom interviewed them, passed away before the book came out. Vic Edelbrock, Jr.
Junior Johnson?
Yeah. God, a lot of them. But he had complete oversight over it, and he told the story. It's a completely accurate for those who, and it actually is a very quick read, even though it's technically 496 pages, and then there's a couple pages in addition, the flyleafs and all that make it 500, but it's 496 on the writing. If you sat down and read it, it's really a quick read, and it is the absolute start to finish, all the good news, the bad news, warts and all of the Justice family, and our business life and racing life. And so it's hopefully an inspirational book for people to want to take risks in life. And it's not all about racing. It's about life, living life, how these guys took risks, how we continue to take risks today. It's just part of life, part of running a business. And if you don't scare yourself, so many things in my life, I put myself into positions where I felt very uncomfortable at the time, but I always grew. And if you don't take those risks, you'll never grow. If you stay where you're comfortable, you will never, ever grow. George Patton had a great quote that I loved. A half way plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan executed next month. Meaning, let's just do it, because you'll never ever have a perfect plan.
Ed, in addition to the book, again, Legacy of Justice, that's available on Amazon, right?
It is, Amazon.com.
Okay, but in addition to the book, you've got a fantastic photo archive. And it's not just your photos, but it's the photos of your fellow auto racing, motor racing photographers over the years, right?
Right, I do. The Justice Archive, if you go to edjusticejr.com, and that's JR for junior.com, you can go to the photographer page, and then at the bottom click on another page that has a lot of photos. That page are all my photographs, but I do have the archives of 9 other significant motorsports photographers. Were friends of mine, which I've acquired. They're all gone, and I have these archives, and they are amazing. And having all their archives along with mine has shown me a lot of truths about how we all went to a race, how we all captured a race, because to be able to compare, how did I capture this race? Okay, how did these other photographers that maybe were at that same race that weekend? It gives me the ability to be able to say, okay, this is exactly the way it was. It wasn't just based on my experience. This was, quote, the way that we did things then compared to the way we did things now. But yeah, no, it's amazing, and the images are available for use. There's a charge, obviously. Look, there's no money in running an archive, okay, unless you're
the Bettman Archive, or Getty.
Or Getty, yeah. Which, but for the most part, I supply pictures to publications or books, or, I had a request the other day from a guy whose dad drove a particular car. He saw the image, and so for that, I will sell a print to somebody like that, because auto racing has been very, very good to the Justice family. We've contributed a lot to auto racing, no doubt, but it's been very, very good to us, and I look at the auto racing world as a family, and I don't look at it as whether this guy, if I sell him a print, whether he can ever do anything for me or not. I'm not looking for that. I'm doing it because I want to do it, and because I think it'd just be cool for this guy to get a print for his dad who drove that car. His dad's still alive, a long time ago, and so that's cool.
Well, Ed, thanks for having me in today. I mean, this has been really special, and we could go on and on, but I just appreciate your time.
Great. I appreciate you coming out, and it's been a real pleasure.
All right, once again, edjusticejr.com. You can learn more. The book is called Legacy of Justice, available on Amazon. Check out Ed's Instagram at edjusticejr, and I'll have all links in the show notes. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you. Great to be with you today. Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show. It's how people find it, and you are absolutely essential for that. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com and support the podcast with as little as $2. I'll see you back here on June 1st with more of the people and the stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick, and as always, thanks for listening.